Next on the news.
A solemn day to honor the lives lost on that fateful day in 2001. The Diocese of Brooklyn dedicated a mass to the New York City Fire Department. I'm Katie Vasquez, and I'll have that story coming up.
The bell tolls, marking the moment the first plane hit the World Trade Center. President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, and former President Donald Trump stand together at the solemn remembrance. Plus, Pope Francis arrives in Singapore on the last leg of his historic journey to Asia and Oceania. I'm Christine Persichetti. Currents News starts right now. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so... Today, we remember the lives taken on that day 23 years ago. We also remember those who succumbed to 9/11 illnesses in the years that followed. And we pray for all those left behind whose lives were forever changed. It is a day to honor the fallen and lift up those left behind. From Lower Manhattan to the Pentagon and Shanksville, Pennsylvania, to right here in the Diocese of Brooklyn, we remember 9/11. Our coverage begins with a somber tradition, members of the FDNY marching from the World Trade Center to the Co-Cathedral of St. Joseph. Katie Vasquez reports.
Dozens of New York's bravest from Battalion 57 walked from Ground Zero across the Brooklyn Bridge, carrying 23 flags to honor the 23 members they lost in the 9/11 attacks. Brooklyn Bishop Robert Brennan walked among them in solidarity.
It was an honor to walk among the firefighters. They really do watch over and protect us at great sacrifice.
They made their way to the Co-Cathedral of St. Joseph for a special mass. Retired Battalion Chief Edward Moriarty knew many of the men who lost their lives that day.
There's one battalion, 3 firehouses, and we lost so many men.
Joining Bishop Brennan on the altar was Father Anthony Palumbo. He was just 15 when his father, New York City firefighter Frank Palumbo, died at the World Trade Center trying to save others.
My father, he gave his life every day. And September 11th was no different than any other day. He gave his life for his wife. He gave his life for his children. He gave his life for church.
Many agree that being in church on this somber anniversary helps to heal the soul.
Seeing the other firefighters and who we've all experienced this tremendous loss, it's such a bonding.
We walk in the darkness, but the people who've walked in the darkness have seen a great light, and that comes from faith, that light, that comes from Christ.
Although 23 years have passed, Father Anthony says he never stops thinking of his dad.
There are just simply days I wake up and I miss my dad. There are plenty of times when I wake up and I say, wow, I just want to have a conversation with my dad.
In Prospect Heights, Katie Vasquez, Currents News.
At the site of the former World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan, a rare show of political unity. Hours after their debate, former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris shook hands. They stood together along with President Biden for the ringing of bells and the moments of silence, marking the time the plane struck, killing nearly 3,000 people. And at the Pentagon, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin took part in a ceremonial wreath laying. 184 people died when the hijacked plane crashed into the Defense Department headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. Their names were read aloud during the solemn ceremony. President Biden and Vice President Harris traveled from Ground Zero to Shanksville, Pennsylvania for the ceremony at the Flight 93 Memorial. The 40 passengers and crew members on the plane, all who lost their lives, are believed to have prevented a larger attack by fighting back against the terrorist hijackers. A retired flight attendant is once again honoring some 9/11 heroes in his own unique way. Paulie Veneto arrived at Ground Zero today after pushing an airline beverage cart for 210 miles, following the path of American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to New York, honoring the flight crews killed that day. We caught up with him right before he arrived at Ground Zero. He says this fourth and final push is emotional.
To be able to be here in New York City, 2 miles away from Ground Zero, and knowing that I've completed the route of all 4, I get emotional. That I've completed all 4 airplanes routes where they took off and where they ended up on 9/11. To be able to roll this beverage cart in honor and memory of these heroes is pretty special.
Even though Paulie has completed all 4 9/11 flight routes, he's not retiring his beverage cart. Moving forward, he says he wants to get community members from all of the towns he's passed through, from Boston to Ground Zero, to take part in the next push. Now to a man from Brooklyn who lost his wife to a 9/11 illness. Jim Hart has written 2 books of poems dedicated to his wife, Sue, who died in 2020 from gallbladder cancer. Currents News' Jessica Easthope sat down with him at his home in Borough Park.
The books that fill the shelves of Jim Hart's Borough Park home library have defined his life.
The first time she loved me, I stood in the deepness of her eyes.
But these words define his love. They're his own, and they're dedicated to his wife, Sue.
And I knew right then I had found that once in a lifetime love perfection. She was the love of my life. It's hard to this day. You know, some days it seems like 3 minutes ago, and some days it seems like 3 lifetimes ago.
Loving Sue and Missing Sue are 2 of Jim's books of poetry.
In your living room with no lights except for the TV.
Sue was and still remains his creative muse. Sue was told she had terminal gallbladder cancer just 3 months before she passed away in 2020. Doctors said it was 9/11 related, a diagnosis that brought Jim back to that day 22 years ago, when Sue was in charge of facilities at City Hall.
Being a husband, I said, go home. And she said, a manager of facilities are in danger here. I can't leave now.
Jim saw with his own eyes what was waiting at Ground Zero. He volunteered there after work as a chief of department for New York City sanitation, hoping to find survivors.
Everything, and I mean everything, the streets, the signs, the buildings, were this kind of tannish color. You could not tell where you were.
He wished his wife, who was a dedicated partner, mother, and employee, hadn't been so dedicated in that moment.
Not only she stayed the first day, I knew Sue, and I knew she was going to go back. It was, you wish she had listened to you and not got to work.
Since 9/11, 69 types of cancer have been linked to the toxic dust at Ground Zero. Sue's duty to her work and to the people of New York wasn't unappreciated.
Susan Hart has been one of City Hall's true heroes.
But as of March of 2023, she and nearly 6,000 others have paid the ultimate price for it. Now, Jim is left with 50 years of memories and 2 works of poetry that have been published in journals all over the world.
I never expected to be the one who lived on.
His love for Sue memorialized forever.
There are a lot of tear-stained pages. There were no blank pages. The ideas flowed as fast as I fell in love with them.
If he could, Jim would rewrite history. But instead, he writes about Sue.
Never knew how Adam mourned his missing rib.
In Borough Park, Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
You could get Jim's books Loving Sue and Missing Sue on Amazon. To read even more 9/11 coverage, including stories from that day and its aftermath, go to thetablet.org. Pope Francis is now in Singapore for the final leg of his 12-day tour of Southeast Asia and Oceania. He was welcomed by children who performed a dance for the Holy Father. The Pope will meet privately with the Jesuits of Singapore. He'll also celebrate Mass in a stadium with an estimated 50,000 Catholics. That is this Currents News Update. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.